They called it a code black in the trauma center, not because of the patient, but because of the guardian who wouldn't let him go. For 6 hours, a pristine trauma bay at Norfolk General was held hostage by a grieving, combat-hardened Belgian Malinois named Baron. He stood over his Navy SEAL handler's body, ready to tear out the throat of anyone who tried to move him. Police snipers were setting up. The kill order was signed. But then, a 23-year-old rookie nurse, trembling and ignored by everyone, did the unthinkable. She walked right into the kill zone and rolled up her scrub sleeve. She didn't have a weapon. She had a tattoo. And what happened next didn't just silence the room. It changed the entire hospital forever. This is the true story of the bond that death couldn't break. The call came into Centara Norfolk General Hospital at 02 hours on a Tuesday, cutting through the sterile silence of the night shift like a jagged knife. Inbound medevac, 5 minutes out, 1 critical, 1 DOA, massive trauma. Be advised we have a K9 unit on board. Status of the animal is agitated. Dr. Alistair Sterling, the attending trauma surgeon, rubbed the sleep from his eyes and snapped his gloves on. He was a man who measured life in milliliters of blood and seconds of response time. He didn't like variables, and he certainly didn't like dogs in his trauma center. Agitated? Sterling barked at the head charge nurse, a stout woman named Brenda focused on the monitors. Why is the dog even on the bird? If the handler is DOA, crate the animal and get it to base security. They couldn't crate him, Doctor, Brenda replied, her voice tight. Pilot says the dog chewed through the restraint webbing when the handler flatlined. He's loose in the cabin. Sterling cursed under his breath. Fine. Security to the helipad. Taser on standby. I want that body in Bay 1 and the dog gone within 60 seconds. But nothing about this night would go according to Dr. Sterling's timeline. When the Seahawk helicopter touched down, the rotor wash whipped the rain into a frenzy. The paramedics rushed out to meet the crew, heads ducked against the wind. The side door slid open, revealing the carnage of a mission gone wrong somewhere across the Atlantic, expedited home. On the stretcher lay Master Chief Dalton Ghost Rivers. He was a legend in the naval special warfare community, a man whose file was redacted so heavily it looked like a barcode. But right now, he was just a body covered in a thermal blanket, his chest still, his war over. And standing directly on top of him, straddling the Master Chief's chest, was Baron. Baron was 80 pounds of muscle and kinetic fury, a Belgian Malinois with a coat the color of dried tobacco and a black mask that hid everything but his eyes. And his eyes were burning. As the first paramedic, a burly guy named Rick, reached for the stretcher, Baron didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply emitted a sound, a low tectonic rumble that vibrated through the metal floor of the chopper. He bared teeth that were capped in titanium, instruments of war designed to crush bone. "Whoa! Back off!" Rick yelled, stumbling back. "We can't unload!" the flight medic screamed over the rotors. "He won't let us touch the chief. He thinks we're hurting him." The hospital security team arrived, yellow rain slickers flashing under the strobe lights. They carried catch poles and tasers. "Don't!" the flight medic warned, waving his arms. "That dog is Tier 1. He sees a weapon, he kills you. Just back away." For 10 agonizing minutes, the helicopter idled, burning fuel, while a standoff ensued in the rain. Finally, it was the motion of the stretcher itself that caused the shift. The vibration of the idling chopper shifted the body. Baron whined, a high-pitched, heart-breaking sound that pierced the mechanical roar. He licked the cold cheek of Dalton Rivers, nudging the bearded face with his wet nose, desperate for a reaction. Seeing the distraction, Rick and the flight medic grabbed the rails of the stretcher. Go! Move! Don't look at the dog! They sprinted the gurney across the tarmac toward the ER bay doors. Baron didn't attack. Instead, he maintained his position on the stretcher, riding the dead body of his master like a guardian gargoyle, surfing the gurney all the way into the bright, fluorescent lights of Trauma Bay 1. The doors slammed shut, cutting off the noise of the storm. Silence fell over the ER. There, in the center of the room, surrounded by millions of dollars of medical equipment, the stretcher came to a halt. Baron stood tall, shaking the rain from his coat, sending a spray of water over the sterile instruments. He planted his 4 paws on the corners of the gurney, creating a physical cage around Dalton Rivers. He looked at the circle of doctors and nurses. He lowered his head. He let out a growl that sounded like tearing metal. Nobody moved. Standing in the far corner of the room, pressing herself into the supply cabinet, was the newest hire, Cassidy June. She was 24, with messy blonde hair tucked into a scrub cap, and eyes that always looked a little too wide, a little too scared. She had been a nurse for exactly 3 weeks. She was the one they sent to get coffee, the one Dr. Sterling yelled at when the IV bags weren't prepped fast enough. Cassidy stared at the dog. She saw the tension in his hindquarters, the dilation of his pupils. She saw something else, too. She saw the tremor in his front right leg. "He's terrified," she whispered. "Quiet, June," Sterling hissed, not looking at her. "Security, get that animal off my patient. I need to call time of death, and I can't do it with Cujo guarding the corpse." 3 security guards stepped forward, batons raised. Baron snapped. The sound was like a gunshot. He lunged air, a warning bite, missing the lead guard's nose by a fraction of an inch before snapping back to his defensive position. "Okay, that's it," Sterling shouted, backing away. "Clear the room. Call the police K9 unit. Call animal control. I want a tranquilizer rifle here now. If that dog moves, shoot it." The room emptied. The glass doors of Trauma Bay 1 slid shut, sealing the dog and the dead seal inside, and the clock started ticking. By 04 hours, the situation had escalated from a medical anomaly to a national security incident. The hospital waiting room was swarming with local police, but they were kept at bay by 2 men in dark suits who had arrived in a black SUV with government plates. They were from the Department of Defense. They weren't talking to the press. Inside the observation deck overlooking Trauma Bay 1, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Dr. Sterling paced back and forth, checking his watch every 30 seconds. "This is insane," Sterling fumed, gesturing through the glass. "We have a deceased serviceman decomposing in my ER, and we are being held hostage by a pet." "He is not a pet, Doctor," said one of the men in suits. He introduced himself only as Agent Miller. "That is a multi-purpose canine. Value is approximately $50,000 in training alone. He holds a rank higher than yours, technically." Sterling turned purple. "He is a biohazard, and he is preventing us from processing the body. I have patients in the waiting room. I am authorizing the police to neutralize the threat." Down in the bay, Baron hadn't moved. He had sat down, his heavy paws crossed over Dalton's chest. He was shivering now. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving only grief and confusion. Every time a nurse walked past the glass wall, Baron's ears would swivel, and a low rumble would emanate from his chest, audible even through the glass. Cassidy June was mopping the floor in the hallway outside, trying to make herself invisible. She couldn't stop looking through the glass. She watched the dog panting, the drool mixing with the dried blood on the SEAL's uniform. She felt a pull in her chest, a physical ache. She knew that look. She knew the specific tilt of the dog's head. "Hey, new girl." Brenda, the charge nurse, snapped her fingers. "Stop staring and go restock the saline in Bay 4. "He's guarding the 6. Cassidy said softly. Brenda paused. What? The 6, Cassidy repeated, clutching the mop handle. The 6 o'clock position. The rear. He thinks his handler is just unconscious, vulnerable. He's covering his back until he wakes up. He won't let anyone near until the handler gives the release command. Brenda looked at Cassidy with a mix of confusion and pity. Look, honey, that handler isn't waking up, and if the cops get their way, that dog is going to sleep permanently in about 20 minutes. It was true. The Norfolk Police Department SWAT commander, a grim-faced man named Captain Holloway, had just arrived. He was conferring with Dr. Sterling and Agent Miller. We can't tranquilize him, Miller was explaining. The stress might kill him given his current heart rate, and if you miss the vein and just make him angry, he'll tear through that glass door before the drugs kick in. He's a land shark, Captain. So we put him down, Holloway said, pragmatically. One shot, clean. We preserve the human remains. He's a decorated asset, Miller argued, though his resistance was fading. He's a public safety hazard, Sterling interjected. I run a hospital, not a kennel. Do it. The decision was made. Holloway signaled to his marksman, a sniper who began setting up a tripod in the hallway, aiming a high-caliber rifle through the open seam of the sliding doors. Cassidy felt her stomach drop. She dropped the mop. The clamor of the metal hitting the floor made everyone turn. No, she said. Her voice was shaking, but it was loud. Dr. Sterling glared at her. Nurse June, get back to work or get out. You can't shoot him. Cassidy walked forward, her hands trembling by her sides. He's just doing his job. He's waiting for the release code. We don't have the release code, young lady, Agent Miller said, his voice tired. The handler is dead. The unit is classified. We can't get a trainer here for another 4 hours. We don't have the time. I can do it, Cassidy said. The room went silent. Dr. Sterling laughed, a harsh, dry sound. You fainted last week when we set a broken tibia. You're going to walk in there with a war machine? I know Malinois, Cassidy said, her voice gaining a strange, brittle strength. I know the protocol. You're a rookie nurse from Ohio, Brenda scoffed. Please, Cassidy looked at Agent Miller. Give me 5 minutes. If I can't calm him, then you can do what you have to do. But don't kill a hero just because he loves his partner too much. Miller looked at the sniper, then at the terrified young woman. He checked his watch. You have 3 minutes. And nurse? If he latches onto you, we shoot through you. Understand? Cassidy nodded. She took a deep breath. She reached for the button to open the glass doors. The sound of the pneumatic doors opening was like a hiss of steam. Inside the bay, the air smelled of copper blood, wet dog fur, and ozone. Baron was on his feet instantly. He didn't bark this time. He went deadly silent, his ears pinned back against his skull, his tail rigid. He lowered his center of gravity, coiling like a spring. Cassidy stepped inside. The doors slid shut behind her, sealing her in. Outside, the entire staff of the ER, the police, and the agents pressed their faces against the glass. Dr. Sterling shook his head. She's suicidal. Prepare a trauma team for severe lacerations and arterial bleeding. Cassidy stood 10 feet away from the gurney. She didn't look Baron in the eyes. That was a challenge. She didn't look at the dead body. She looked at the dog's paws. Hey, buddy, she whispered. Baron let out a roar, a burst of noise designed to stop a human heart. He snapped his jaws, the sound echoing off the tiled walls. He took a step forward, sliding off the gurney to stand between Cassidy and Dalton. He was huge up close. A scar ran down his muzzle, white against the black fur. Cassidy froze. She didn't flinch. She turned her body sideways, presenting a smaller target, a non-threatening posture. "Fuss," she said softly. It was the German command for heel. Baron's ears twitched. He knew the word. But he wasn't obeying. He took another step, his hackles raised so high he looked like a hyena. He was 5 feet away now. One lunge. "He's going to maul her," Holloway said outside, raising his hand to signal the sniper. Cassidy saw the dog's muscles bunching for the launch. She knew she had seconds. Words wouldn't work. This dog was in the red zone, a psychological state where training is overridden by instinct and grief. He needed a visual anchor. He needed to see authority. Slowly, with the agonizing pace of a glacier, Cassidy raised her left arm. She wore the standard navy blue nursing scrubs. With her right hand, she reached for the shoulder of her left sleeve. Baron growled, sensing movement. He bared his teeth, ready to strike the moving limb. Cassidy gripped the fabric and rolled it up. She rolled it past her elbow, past the faint scars of old scratches, all the way to her shoulder. There, inked into the pale skin of her deltoid, was a tattoo. It wasn't a butterfly or a flower. It was a complex, dark geometric design. A stylized spear broken in half, wrapped in a lightning bolt, with a paw print sitting in the center of the break. Below it were the letters K9DH. Unit 4. Baron froze. The dog's head tilted. The growl died in his throat, replaced by a sharp intake of air. His eyes, previously dilated with rage, focused on the ink. It was the insignia of the Darkhorse K9 unit, a defunct Black Ops training program that didn't officially exist. Cassidy didn't stop there. She tapped the tattoo with 2 fingers. Then she dropped to her knees on the blood-spattered floor, putting herself at the dog's level, a position of ultimate vulnerability. "Baron," she said, her voice cracking with an emotion the hospital staff had never heard from her. "Baron, stand down. Overwatch is over." The dog trembled. He looked at the dead man, then at the girl, then at the tattoo. He took a hesitant step toward her. He sniffed the air. He smelled the antiseptic of the hospital, but beneath that, he smelled something else on her. He smelled gun oil. He smelled old pine. He smelled memory. Baron let out a whimper that broke the hearts of everyone watching. He walked up to Cassidy. He didn't bite her. He pressed his massive head into her chest, knocking the wind out of her. Cassidy wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, burying her face in his wet fur. She began to sob. "I know," she whispered into his ear. "I know, baby. I missed him too." Outside the glass, Agent Miller lowered his sunglasses. "My God," he muttered. "That's not just a nurse." Dr. Sterling stared, his mouth slightly open. "Who is she?" Miller turned to the doctor. "If she has that ink, she's the one who trained him." The silence in Trauma Bay 1 was heavier than the lead aprons hanging on the radiology rack. The only sound was the rhythmic, wet breathing of the dog and the soft, ragged sobs of the nurse kneeling on the linoleum. Agent Miller signaled the sniper to stand down. He holstered his weapon and tapped the glass, gesturing for Dr. Sterling to open the door. "She's safe," Miller said, his voice grim. "Open it." Slowly. As the glass doors parted, the smell hit the corridor, the distinct, earthy scent of a wet animal mixed with the metallic tang of the battlefield that clung to the body on the gurney. "Nurse June?" Dr. Sterling asked, his voice losing its usual imperious edge. He stepped into the room cautiously, keeping his eyes on the dog. Cassidy didn't look up. She was busy. She was checking the dog's paws, running her hands over his flanks, checking for shrapnel, speaking in a low, rapid-fire language that sounded like a mix of German and Dutch. "Brav, rustig, laat kijken." "Good. Quiet. Let me look." Baron, the lethal animal that had held a SWAT team at bay for hours, was leaning his entire weight against her thigh, eyes half closed, surrendering the burden of his watch. "Cassidy!" Agent Miller stepped into the room. He didn't look at the dog, he looked at the tattoo on her arm. "I haven't seen a Darkhorse brand in 3 years, not since the program was scrubbed." Cassidy finally stood up. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing a trace of the dog's saliva on her cheek. She looked older now. The rookie nurse facade had evaporated, revealing a hardness in her jawline that no one had noticed before. "The program wasn't scrubbed, Agent," she said, her voice raspy. "It was buried. There's a difference." "You're Cassidy June," Miller said, realization washing over him. "CJ, the dog whisperer of Kandahar. You were the lead civilian contractor for the Tier 1 K9 integration." Dr. Sterling blinked. "Wait, my nurse, the one who barely knows how to log into the pharmacy system?" Cassidy looked at the surgeon. "I know how to log in, Doctor. I just pretend I don't so I can stay in the background. I came here to disappear." She looked down at the body on the stretcher. Her hand trembled as she reached out and touched the cold, wet boot of Master Chief Dalton Rivers. "I failed him," she whispered. The flashback. 3 years ago, Cassidy June hadn't been scrubbing bedpans in Norfolk. She had been standing in the dust of a forward operating base in Jalalabad, wearing tactical pants and a t-shirt stained with sweat and treat crumbs. She wasn't military. She was something more niche. She was a behaviorist, a prodigy who could look at a Belgian Malinois puppy and tell you within 5 minutes if it had the psychological constitution to jump out of a plane at 20,000 feet. That was where she met Dalton Rivers. He had come to the kennels looking for a replacement. His previous dog, a shepherd named Rex, had been killed by an IED. Dalton was angry, closed off, and skeptical of the 21-year-old girl running the selection program. "I need a weapon, not a pet," Dalton had sneered, looking at the row of whining dogs. "Give me the meanest bastard you have." "You don't need mean," Cassidy had countered, unfazed by the terrifying Master Chief. "Mean gets you killed. Mean is fear. You need clarity. You need a switch." She had walked him to the end of the line, to a crate labeled Project. Baron. Baron was a problem dog. He was too smart, too aggressive, and he had washed out 3 other handlers because he anticipated their commands before they gave them. If they hesitated, he took charge. In the field, that was dangerous. "He doesn't respect anyone," Cassidy explained, opening the crate. Baron trotted out, ignoring Dalton completely to sit by Cassidy's side, staring intensely at a ball in her pocket. "He needs a partner who is faster than he is." "Mentally." Dalton had knelt. For the first time, his face softened. He didn't reach out. He just waited. Baron walked over, sniffed Dalton's neck, and then, in a move that surprised even Cassidy, placed his paw on Dalton's knee. "He picks you," Cassidy said. For the next 6 months, Cassidy lived in the space between the man and the beast. She trained them to breathe in sync. She taught Dalton how to read the twitch of Baron's ear. She taught Baron that Dalton's heartbeat was the rhythm of the mission. And somewhere in the dust and the heat, the lines blurred. Cassidy and Dalton grew close. It wasn't a romance of flowers and dates. It was a romance of shared survival. Late nights cleaning gear. Quiet conversations under the vast Afghan stars about home. About the silence they both feared. "When I get out," Dalton had told her once, scratching Baron's ears, "I'm taking him. And I'm coming to find you. We'll open a kennel. No more wars." "Promise?" she had asked. "SEAL's honor," he grinned. Then came the mission in the Petch Valley. Cassidy wasn't cleared to go, but she listened on the comms. She heard the ambush. She heard the explosion. She heard the silence. The report said Dalton was evac'd with critical injuries, but he survived. Baron was lost in the chaos, presumed KIA. Cassidy broke. She left the contracting world. She couldn't handle the ghosts. She moved to Norfolk, Dalton's home base, hoping to run into him. But she never did. She heard rumors he had redeployed immediately. She assumed he had moved on, or that he blamed her for the loss of the dog. She became a nurse to learn how to heal, to stop being an architect of violence. Back in the ER. "He found him," Cassidy said to the room, snapping back to the present. She stroked Baron's head. Dalton went back. He didn't just redeploy. He went back to find Baron. That's why he was out there. She looked at Agent Miller. "Tell me I'm right." Miller nodded slowly. "Classified mission. Unauthorized, actually. Master Chief Rivers heard rumors of a feral Malinois running with a pack of wild dogs in the Pech district, terrorizing the Taliban. He took a leave of absence. He went to get his dog." "He got him," Cassidy said, tears spilling over. "He brought him home. But he died doing it." Dr. Sterling cleared his throat. The emotional weight was suffocating, but he had a job to do. "Nurse June." "Cassidy," Sterling corrected himself. "I am sorry for your loss, truly. But we have a legal obligation. The coroner is en route. We need to process the body. Can you remove the dog?" Cassidy nodded. She took a deep breath. She looked at Baron. "Baron," she said firmly. "Vry. Free." It was the release command. The command that meant work is done. Go be a dog. But Baron didn't move. He stood up, but he didn't step away. Instead, he turned around and placed his front paws back on the stretcher, right on Dalton's chest. He looked at Cassidy, and then he let out a sharp, piercing bark. "Woof!" Cassidy froze. "I gave the command," she whispered. "He never disobeys." "Maybe he's just traumatized," Brenda suggested gently from the doorway. Baron barked again, louder. He looked at Cassidy, then looked at Dalton's face, then back at Cassidy. He nudged Dalton's chest aggressively with his nose. "Woof! Woof!" A chill went down Cassidy's spine. She knew every vocalization this dog was capable of making. She knew his threat bark, his play bark, and his alert bark. This was the alert bark, the one he used when he found a survivor in the rubble. "Doctor," Cassidy said, her voice trembling. "Bring the crash cart." "What?" Sterling asked, annoyed. "He's dead, nurse. He's been dead for 6 hours. The flight medic called it. Rigor is likely setting in." "Bring the cart!" Cassidy screamed, her eyes blazing with a ferocity that made the security guards flinch. "The dog is alerting. He's signaling a live find." "That's impossible," Sterling scoffed. "He's cyanotic. He's cold." "Baron doesn't lie." Cassidy grabbed a stethoscope from the wall mount. She didn't wait for permission. She shoved past the dog, who immediately stepped aside to let her in, but blocked everyone else, and jammed the earpieces into her ears. She ripped open the thermal blanket. She placed the bell of the stethoscope on the silent, scarred chest of Dalton Rivers. The room held its breath. Silence. Cassidy closed her eyes, pressing the bell harder, straining against the ambient noise of the ventilation system. Thump. It was so faint it could have been a drop of water falling in the next room. She waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Thump. Cassidy's eyes flew open. She looked at Dr. Sterling, her face pale as a sheet. "He's not dead," she whispered. "He's in Lazarus. He's bradycardic. Extremely slow heart rate. Probably hypothermia masked by a paralytic agent." Sterling rushed forward. "Don't be ridiculous." He grabbed the stethoscope. He listened. His arrogance vanished in an instant. "Code Blue!" Sterling roared, spinning around. "I have a rhythm. It's faint, but it's there. Get me epinephrine. Get me warm fluids. Warm everything. We need to intubate. Move! 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 The trauma bay exploded into chaos. This wasn't the orderly, sterile procedure of a normal Code Blue. This was a war zone surgery. "I need access to the femoral artery," Sterling shouted. "Nurse, cut those pants! Get a warming blanket!" "We can't get close," Rick the paramedic yelled. He tried to step in with the defibrillator pads, but Baron snarled, snapping at his hand. The dog was confused. The sudden aggression, the shouting, the people rushing his handler. To Baron, this looked like an attack. He lunged, catching the sleeve of a resident doctor. "Get the dog out!" Sterling screamed. "I can't work with a wolf in here." "No!" Cassidy shouted. She was multitasking, spiking an IV bag with one hand and holding Baron's collar with the other. "If you take him out, he'll tear the door down. He knows Dalton is alive. He thinks you're hurting him. Then control him, June, or I swear to God I'll inject him myself." Cassidy dropped to her knees beside the stretcher, right in the middle of the medical fray. She grabbed Baron's muzzle with both hands, forcing the dog to look at her. "Baron! Platz! Bleib!" The dog vibrated with tension, his eyes darting to the doctors inserting tubes into Dalton's throat. "Look at me," Cassidy commanded, her face inches from the dog's fangs. "They are helping. Helping." She took Baron's paw and placed it on her own scrub top, right over her heart, then moved it to Dalton's arm. "Friend," she said softly. "Pack." Baron let out a whine that sounded like a scream, but he sat. He sat right next to the wheels of the gurney, tucking his body underneath the metal frame. He became a statue, his eyes glued to the heart monitor that was currently a flat line. "Okay, he's clear!" Cassidy yelled. "Work!" For the next hour, Cassidy June was not a nurse. She was a conduit. She stood with one hand buried in the fur of the dog beneath the stretcher, and the other handing instruments to Dr. Sterling. "Core temp is 82 degrees, Brenda called out. "He's an icicle." "Pushing epi," the resident said. "Still no capture on the pacemaker." "Come on, Dalton," Cassidy whispered, looking at the grey face of the man she had loved in the silence of the desert. "You didn't come back from the dead just to die in Norfolk. Fight." Under the stretcher, Baron began to howl. It wasn't a loud howl. It was a low, melodic crooning. He was singing to the Master Chief. "What is that noise?" Sterling snapped, sweat dripping from his forehead. "He's calling him back," Cassidy said. "Keep pumping." Suddenly the monitor beeped. A erratic, jagged green line shot across the screen. "Beep! Beep!" "We have a rhythm," Brenda shouted. "Sinus bradycardia. He's speeding up." "Pressure is rising," the anesthesiologist called out. 80 over 40. 90 over 50. Dalton's chest heaved. A gasp of air rushed into the ventilator tube, fogging the plastic. "He's back," Sterling said, dropping his hands and exhaling a breath he felt he'd been holding for an hour. "Good God, he's back." The room erupted in cheers. Nurses hugged each other. Even Agent Miller, standing in the corner, wiped his eyes. But Cassidy didn't cheer. She slid down the side of the cabinet and hit the floor, exhausted. Baron crawled out from under the stretcher. He didn't go to Dalton this time. He went to Cassidy. He licked the tears off her face, his tail wagging slowly, thumping against the cabinets. The twist. 2 days later, Dalton Rivers was stable. He was in the ICU, warmed up, stitched up, and waking up. The story had gone global. The dog who guarded the ghost. The nurse who read the ink. Cassidy was sitting by his bedside, reading a magazine, Baron asleep on her feet. The hospital administration had made an exception for the dog. He was now officially listed as a therapy assistant. Dalton groaned. His eyes fluttered open. He looked around the sterile room, blinking against the harsh light. His eyes found the dog. Then they found the girl. "Seijay," he croaked, his voice like gravel. "Hey, ghost," she smiled, putting the magazine down. "You took your time." "I had to go get him," Dalton whispered. "I promised." "I know," she said, reaching out to hold his hand. Dalton squeezed her fingers. He looked at the dog, then back at her. His expression turned serious, urgent. "Cassidy," he said, his heart rate monitor picking up speed. "The dog, Baron, he wasn't guarding me." Cassidy frowned. "What do you mean? Of course he was. He stood over you for 6 hours." "No." Dalton tried to sit up, wincing. "Listen to me. In the helicopter, before I went under, I put it in his vest." "Put what?" "The intel," Dalton rasped. "The reason they shot us down. The reason my own team left me for dead. It wasn't a rescue mission, Cass. It was a clean-up." Cassidy froze. The air in the room suddenly felt very cold. "Dalton, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Dalton whispered, looking at the door, "that the people who shot me, they aren't Taliban. And I think one of them is in the lobby right now waiting for visiting hours." Cassidy looked at Baron. The dog was awake now. He wasn't looking at Dalton. He was looking at the door of the ICU room, and he was growling. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only metronome for the adrenaline flooding Cassidy's system. Dalton's confession hung in the air like smoke. The cleanup. Cassidy stood up slowly, her hands trembling. She looked at the heavy tactical vest Baron was still wearing. The hospital staff had tried to remove it earlier, but the dog had growled every time they touched the buckles. Now she knew why. He wasn't just guarding his master. He was guarding the evidence. "Where is it?" Cassidy whispered, kneeling beside the dog. Dalton pointed a shaking finger. "Left shoulder panel, inside the lining. You have to cut it." Cassidy grabbed the trauma shears from her pocket, the ones she used to cut gauze. She ran her fingers along the inside of Baron's heavy Kevlar harness. She felt it. A small, hard rectangle, no bigger than a fingernail, sewn deep into the padding. She snubbed the shears against the fabric and snipped. A tiny micro SD card fell into her palm. "I have it," she breathed. "Hide it," Dalton rasped, his eyes fixed on the door handle. "And get out, if Miller comes in here." The handle turned. Cassidy didn't have time to run. She shoved the tiny memory card inside her scrub cap, tucking it into her messy bun. She spun around just as the door swung open. It was Agent Miller. He was alone. He had shed his suit jacket, his sleeves rolled up. He looked calm, professional, and utterly terrifying. "Nurse June," Miller smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Sterling said our patient is awake. That's miraculous." "He's still groggy," Cassidy stammered, stepping between Miller and the bed. Baron stood up, a low rumble vibrating in his throat. This wasn't the alert growl. This was the deep, guttural sound of a predator about to kill. "I bet he is," Miller said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. He locked it. The click echoed like a gunshot. "I need to take his statement. Immediately. Protocol implies I do this alone. You can wait in the hall." "I can't leave him," Cassidy said, planting her feet. "He's critical." "Hospital policy says—" "I don't care about policy." Miller's voice dropped an octave. He reached into his waistband. He didn't pull out a badge. He pulled out a syringe. "And I don't care about witnesses." Dalton tried to surge forward, but his body was too weak. "Miller, don't do it. The files are already uploaded." "Nice try, Ghost," Miller sneered, uncapping the needle. "We jammed the comms in the valley. Nothing got out. You died in a crash. It's a tragedy. And this dog, well, he had to be put down because he mauled a nurse. Another tragedy." Miller stepped forward, the syringe raised. It wasn't a sedative. It was clear liquid, potassium chloride. Enough to stop a heart instantly. "No!" Cassidy screamed. She grabbed the nearest object, a metal kidney dish, and hurled it at Miller. It bounced harmlessly off his shoulder. Miller laughed, a cold, dry sound. He lunged for Dalton's IV line, aiming to inject the poison directly into the port. He forgot one variable. He forgot the Belgium Malinois. "Baron, Packen! Baron, attack! Seize!" Dalton screamed the command with the last ounce of air in his lungs. Baron didn't need the command. He had been waiting for 6 hours for permission to unleash the violence he had been holding back. The dog launched himself from the foot of the bed. He was a blur of brown and black fur. He didn't go for the arm. He went for the chest. 80 pounds of muscle hit Miller with the force of a battering ram, knocking the agent backward into the crash cart. Trays of instruments, vials of adrenaline, and saline bags crashed to the floor in a cacophony of shattering glass. Miller screamed as Baron's jaws clamped onto his forearm, the arm holding the syringe. The crunch of the radius bone breaking was audible over the chaos. The syringe flew across the room. But Miller was trained. He was special ops, rogue or not. With his free hand, he reached for a concealed holster at his ankle, a compact pistol. "Cassidy, the gun!" Dalton yelled. Miller kicked the dog hard in the ribs. Baron yelped, but didn't let go. He shook his head violently, tearing at the suit fabric and flesh. Miller raised the gun, aiming it at the dog's head. Cassidy didn't think. She didn't calculate. She reacted. She saw the defibrillator charging station on the wall. She grabbed the paddles. They were always kept on standby. "Clear!" she shrieked, a habit from her training. She didn't put them on a patient. She lunged forward and jammed the paddles into Agent Miller's neck just as he pulled the trigger. Bang! The gun went off, the bullet shattering the observation window. Zap! 200 joules of electricity surged through Agent Miller. His body went rigid. His eyes rolled back. He convulsed violently, dropping the gun. Baron released his grip instantly as the man collapsed to the floor, twitching. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the heavy panting of the dog and the rapid alarms of the disconnected monitors. Security guards burst through the shattered door a second later, weapons drawn. "Drop it! Drop the weapon!" Cassidy stood there, holding the defibrillator paddles like firearms, her chest heaving. Blood from Miller's arm splattered on her scrubs. Baron stood over the unconscious agent, daring anyone to come closer. "He tried to kill him," Cassidy gasped, pointing at Miller. "Check his pocket. Check the syringe." Captain Holloway pushed through the guards. He looked at the scene. The unconscious federal agent, the fierce dog, the rookie nurse with the paddles. He looked at the bullet hole in the window. He knelt down and picked up the syringe Miller had dropped. He sniffed the tip. "Potassium," Holloway muttered. He looked at Cassidy. "You just saved a lot of paperwork, nurse." Dalton slumped back onto his pillows, a weak grin spreading across his face. "That," he whispered, "is one hell of a nurse." 6 months later, the silence in the Shenandoah Valley was different from the silence in Trauma Bay 1. It wasn't the sterile, suffocating quiet of holding one's breath before a flatline. It was a living silence, filled with the rustle of wind through the Blue Ridge pines, the distant hum of a tractor, and the rhythmic, thumping cadence of paws hitting the earth. The sign hanging above the wrought iron gate was new, but the wood looked old, burned at the edges to give it character. Hand-carved into the oak were the words, Darkhorse, Sanctuary and Rehabilitation Center for the Broken and the Brave. Cassidy June stood on the wraparound porch of the farmhouse, wiping her hands on a rag. She wasn't wearing scrubs anymore. She was dressed in worn denim jeans and a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up high. The tattoo on her left shoulder, the broken spear and the lightning bolt, was no longer hidden. It was a badge of honor now, exposed to the warm Virginia sun. She leaned against the railing, watching the scene unfolding in the 3-acre fenced paddock below. To the untrained eye, it looked like a chaotic recess at a dog park. To Cassidy, it was a finely tuned orchestra of recovery. There were 12 dogs in the yard. None of them were normal. There was a German shepherd with a titanium prosthetic leg, a survivor of a DEA raid in Mexico. There was a twitchy, scarred Dutch shepherd who had been retired from the K-9 unit in Chicago because he couldn't handle loud noises. And there was a blind Labrador who had sniffed out IEDs until a blast took his vision. They were the throwaways, the liabilities, the ones the system had used up and spat out. But in the center of the field, bringing order to the chaos, was Baron. The Belgian Malinois looked different now. The tactical vest was gone, replaced by a thick leather collar. His coat, once matted with the grime of the battlefield and the blood of the ER, shone like burnished copper. He moved with a regal, effortless power, trotting between the other dogs, breaking up squabbles with a sharp look, guiding the blind lab away from the fence line. He was the alpha. But he wasn't ruling through fear. He was ruling through experience. The screen door behind Cassidy creaked open. The sound was followed by the heavy, uneven thud of a boot, then the tap of a cane. "You're staring at him again," a gravelly voice said. Cassidy smiled without turning around. "I'm just making sure he's not teaching the rookie how to dismantle the tractor." Dalton Rivers stepped out onto the porch. He looked thinner than he had in the hospital, the bulk of his combat muscle trimmed down to a lean, wiry strength. He walked with a noticeable limp, a permanent reminder of the crash and the hypothermia that had nearly claimed his leg. But he was upright. He held 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He handed one to Cassidy and leaned his hip against the railing, taking the weight off his bad leg. "He misses it, you know," Dalton said quietly, watching Baron freeze as a hawk circled overhead. "The work, the adrenaline. You can take the dog out of the war, but I don't know if you can take the war out of the dog." "He's not at war anymore, Dalton," Cassidy said softly, blowing the steam off her coffee. "He's just on patrol. It's different. He knows this is his perimeter now." Dalton took a sip, the bitter warmth grounding him. "I know the feeling." The last 6 months had been a whirlwind that neither of them had expected. The night at a Norfolk General had triggered a domino effect that reached the highest levels of the Pentagon. The micro-SD card Dalton had hidden in Baron's vest didn't just contain mission logs. It contained proof of an illegal arms trade orchestrated by a rogue faction within the Defense Department, a faction led by Agent Miller. The fallout had been nuclear: congressional hearings, indictments, and a media frenzy that had plastered Dalton's and Cassidy's faces on every news channel from CNN to Al Jazeera. They called her the Angel with the Ink. They called Dalton the ghost who walked back. But they didn't care about the fame. As soon as Dalton was discharged, honorably, with a purple heart he'd tossed into a drawer, they had cashed out his pension, combined it with Cassidy's savings, and bought this farm. They had disappeared again, this time by choice. "Miller's sentencing was today," Dalton said, breaking the comfortable silence. He didn't look at Cassidy. He looked at the tree line. Cassidy stiffened slightly. "I didn't turn on the TV." "Life without parole," Dalton said. "Leavenworth. They almost gave him the chair, but he cut a deal to give up the rest of his network." "Good," Cassidy said, her voice hard. She looked down at the scar on her arm where Miller had grabbed her, a faint echo of that night. "He can rot." "He can," Dalton agreed. He shifted his grip on the cane. "The Pentagon called again this morning." Cassidy turned to face him, her eyebrows raised. "Let me guess, they want Baron for a photo op? Or do they want you to consult on the new training protocols?" "Both," Dalton chuckled dryly. "And they want to award Baron the PDSA Dickin Medal. It's the animal equivalent of the Victoria Cross. They want a ceremony in D.C., full-dress blues, the works. What did you tell them? Dalton looked down at the dogs. Baron had stopped running. He was standing perfectly still, his nose in the air, scenting the wind coming off the mountains. He looked majestic, a statue of pure instinct and loyalty. I told them no, Dalton said. Cassidy smiled, a genuine warm expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Why? Because he doesn't need a medal, Dalton said, his voice thickening with emotion. A medal is just metal. It's for the humans. It makes them feel better about sending dogs to die. Baron doesn't care about brass. He cares about the pack. He cares about the mission. Dalton turned to Cassidy. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. And besides, Dalton whispered, he already got his reward. He got us. He got home. Cassidy squeezed his hand. We all did. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the road, a truck backfiring as it passed the property line. In an instant, the peace shattered. In the paddock, the dogs scattered, barking in confusion. The blind lab spun in circles, yelping, but Baron didn't run. He dropped instantly into a combat crouch, his hackles raised, his teeth bared. He positioned himself directly between the gate and the other dogs. He let out that same terrifying roar that had frozen the SWAT team in the trauma bay. On the porch, Dalton flinched, his hand going instinctively to a sidearm that wasn't there. Cassidy felt her heart hammer against her ribs. Then, silence returned. The truck faded into the distance. Baron stayed in his crouch for 10 seconds. He scanned the perimeter. He looked at the porch, locking eyes with Dalton. Dalton nodded once, a microscopic movement. Clear, he whispered. Baron exhaled, a long, heavy chuff of air. He stood up, shook his coat out, as if shedding the tension physically, and trotted over to the blind lab to nudge him reassuringly. See? Cassidy whispered, tears pricking her eyes. He's still guarding the 6. Dalton looked at the woman who had saved his life, not with medicine, but with courage. He looked at the tattoo that had stopped a bullet. He looked at the cane that held him up. We're a bunch of broken toys, aren't we, Cass? He murmured. Cassidy stepped closer, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head on his chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm of the heart that had once stopped beating. We aren't broken, Ghost, she said, fierce and low. We're just reassembled. That's what the kintsugi is. The gold in the cracks makes the bowl stronger. Dalton kissed the top of her head. You and your metaphors. They work, she laughed. Baron had left the pack now. He was trotting up the path toward the porch. He climbed the wooden steps, his claws clicking softly. He didn't go to his water bowl. He didn't go to his bed. He came and sat directly between them and the stairs. He faced outward, toward the world, his back to his humans. He laid his head on his paws, but his ears remained swiveled back, listening to their breathing. Dalton sat down on the swing, pulling Cassidy down with him. The sun was dipping below the blue ridge, painting the sky in violent streaks of purple and orange, colors that reminded them of Afghanistan, but without the danger. Hey, Baron, Dalton called out softly. The dog's ear twitched. Overwatch is over, buddy, Dalton said. Stand down. Baron lifted his head. He looked at Dalton, then at Cassidy. He let out a long, contented sigh that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. He didn't move from his spot, but his eyes closed. For the first time in years, the soldier slept. The Guardian was finally at rest, watching over the only treasure he had ever cared about. Baron and Dalton proved that the bond between a handler and their K9 isn't just about training commands or tactical gear. It is a soul connection that transcends logic, rank, and even the finality of death. Cassidy June didn't just save a patient in that trauma bay. She saved a brotherhood. She reminded us that sometimes the only medicine that works is loyalty. At Darkhorse Sanctuary, the mission continues. Not to fight wars, but to heal the warriors left behind. If this story moved you, you have a mission today. Please hit that like button, not for the algorithm, but to honor the working dogs who stand guard in the dark while we sleep in safety. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because we have more incredible true stories of survival and courage coming your way every week. And I want to hear from you in the comments below. Do you believe dogs have a sixth sense? Have you ever had an animal protect you when you were vulnerable? Share your story with our community. Until next time, stay safe, hold your loved ones close, and keep watch.